how Kenyan voters actually went and cast their ballot. What were they thinking about? Because 24 really is a high turnover.
That's very true, Betty. But also, just to note that in Parliament, out of the 290 elected members of the National Assembly, 166 of them were sent packing.
That is more than three-quarters,
very true. And that's even lower than the figure that was in 2013. So the trend you get here is that Kenyans have a pattern of ensuring a very high turnover of elected representatives. We are yet to see the figures for the MCAs, but I think so far you can say that Kenyans like replacing their elected leaders. And maybe the issues or the reasons why we have such a high turnover, even for governors, like we said in the previous show here, it's a mixture of many factors. And we could look at a few cases, in Bomet, and the political, you can say, competition between the deputy president and the former governor of Bomet, such political factors. In other areas, you hear stories about clanism or intra-county division between the voters, and calculations between the different competitors, which lead to these changes. So in the counties that you've pointed out where there are changes, I'm sure you can find specific reasons why there was such a turnover. Yes.
Could it also be that Kenyans are now more aware that, with the devolved system of governance, governors now have a bigger responsibility as to how they live their lives, as to whether they're able to have access to jobs, to proper healthcare? Are they now starting to realize that?
I believe so, because even without civic education or forums, just looking at what devolution has achieved over the past 4 years, of course, the impact, like for instance, improved education standards or improved life expectancy, all that will be in the long term. But there are some things which you can see all over the country. The rural access roads, which were ignored in the past, they have been opened up. New dispensaries built, ECD, early childhood education facilities. If you look at the reports, a very tremendous increase in those. So I think that alone has enhanced the consciousness at the local level and expectations. And therefore, maybe that should have informed the voters' choices over the governors. But you can also not discount the usual political factors in this country, the resources at a candidate's disposal. I also talked earlier about the clan dynamics at the county level, or whatever political makeup of a county and the competitors.
All right, so it's like a cocktail of reasons why we have such high turnover.
Very true.
But also being an expert in this field, and just taking into consideration that this was the first 4 years of devolution, what would you be your rating as to the performance of, generally most of the governors?
A very interesting question, Betty. The first thing is the first 4 years of devolution. It's the first time that we were experimenting with this devolved system of government. And if you look at the reports or even the performance, especially for the first 3 years, there were tremendous challenges with regard to transition. Very many laws which were to be passed. As we speak now, we do not have a Health Act in place. The Water Act came into force recently, and it's being challenged in court. That tells you that there's massive challenges in terms of legislation, policy, and ensuring that we have coherence at the national level and county level with regard to performance of national and county functions. Apart from that is also the issue of capacity. The counties, of course, have built some capacity over the last 4 years. They have the county public service boards, which have hired staff and all that, but still, for effective performance of those functions, we still have capacity gaps which need to be addressed. So putting together all those challenges which counties have faced over the last 5 years, you can say that they really was, they tried because if you look at specific indicators like the number of health units which were built, the ECD schools which I've talked about, which is a county function. If you look at the number of doctors and nurses who were hired, pre-devolution era and post-devolution era, the access to nurses, clinical officers, and medical doctors has actually increased, and if you look at that.
And especially talking about the nurses, right now they're still, not at their workstations. And, this is just one of the problems really that affected the 4 years of devolution and the county governments. What is your assessment of how they were able to tackle such issues, to do with the doctor's strike, now the nurses' strike? What is your assessment of that? Were they able to do that to the best of their ability?
Of course not, because if we start with the doctors, we had more than 100 days of doctors' strike, and then nurses currently are still on strike, which tells you that there's a problem. The thing is, throughout the strike, I was observing carefully, there was no reference by the PS or even the governors on the absence of a law on health. The Health Act is not yet in force, and which tells you that either we do not look at the law when we face substantive challenges in the health sector, or it's not a priority. And it should be a priority because the law is the one which will set the functions for the national level and the responsibilities for the national governments and the county governments when you have a health crisis. Otherwise, you start solving problems through conjecture or not appealing to set policies, laws, or standards. So that was one of my main concerns. Secondly, we needed to recognize that there is the national level with its own functions under the Constitution, and the county level with its own functions. And that is very important because then you start setting the functional boundaries. And after recognizing the distinctness of what you can do at the national and county level, the next point is to set rules of cooperation, because Article 6(2) of the Constitution talks about the two levels of government cooperating in solving problems. And that cooperation, as I said earlier, is based on an understanding of the functional boundaries. So in this, if you apply that standard to the health, the doctors, and just the health sector generally, is that the national level is in charge of policy making, and the counties are in charge of execution, and that should lead the process. If doctors are on strike, that's a national crisis that needs to be addressed, but both levels of government to be involved in crafting the solution. And we have 47 different public services. The doctors are hired by counties, and so some of it, like negotiating with the doctors' union, those are things which the two levels of government have to agree and have some common standards which the ministry and the counties work together.
All right. Just looking back into the last 4 years, and there are quite a number of issues of priorities for the county governments, and you could say maybe it was a new system of governance, and people needed to know how to work and how to conduct themselves, especially for the MCAs, for the governors, and everybody who was working in the county. But we saw quite a number of trips abroad for benchmarking, which really cost the taxpayer quite some money. You had MCAs who are going to learn how to use iPads and things like that. Are we likely to see that right now, and what should the county governments prioritize this time round?
It's true, we had a lot of errors, trial and errors in the first session. But now that you bring up the issue of finance management, one of the problems which I have observed in the first term, and it's likely to proceed into the second term, is that we have not set controls on the spending powers of county governments and accountability. The Auditor General every year releases audit queries for county governments, and these are published. And what is required in the law is that the county assemblies or the National Assembly follow up with the recommendations from the Auditor General. And every other year, that's just about it. It ends with the publication. And the Auditor General has on many occasions talked about enforcement of the recommendations or follow-up, which is usually lacking. So I hope somehow that we'll find a way of following up and ensuring that there's that accountability, especially when the auditor has done his assessment and raised queries. Those should be followed up. The other issue, now that we're talking about finances for county governments, there's been a perennial problem of delayed disbursements. Counties, and that really affects, because when doctors and nurses and other health workers do not receive their salaries on time, then it's I think it's a violation of their rights as workers in this country, and it leads to all sorts of problems.
What leads to that late disbursement of these monies?
The point is the counties themselves, there's a bit of mixed responses. The counties themselves say that there's delayed disbursements from the National Treasury to the county revenue funds, so that they can access the funds and pay salaries. On the other hand, whenever such an issue is raised, the National Treasury also publishes its reports and says, they even show and say that these are the 47 county revenue funds, and these are the balances inside there, so the delayed disbursements is not an issue. And I think, in my view, the solution here is that the Senate needs to step up its oversight and see, which is two-pronged. Look at the National Treasury and ensure that they even have a quarterly disbursement schedule and ensure that it's on time. And then also ensure that if there is any weaknesses on the parts of counties in terms of, I think payroll issues were cleared. So the Senate needs to find out what are the legal or gaps at the national level to ensure that there is that smooth flow of funds to counties, so that we do not have these problems every other time. The other thing also is just timelines sometimes are very tight. Like some counties may not be able to use their funds now because the county assemblies, when they went into the election, did not pass the supplementary budget. So they need to convene, swear in, and start and pass a supplementary budget to enable the new governor to make some disbursement. And that may occasion some delays in the next 1, 2, 3 months that we are facing. And
I mean, looking forward, and we'll go back to some of the corruption allegations that were leveled against some county executives, in the last 4 years. And like you mentioned correctly, we had the Auditor General giving out these reports, and even here on KTN News, we plastered them all over. But what should happen after that? And do you think that the Senate has been able to, oversight, the county governments and how they run, and ask questions about, the usage of the finances availed to the county governments? And what should happen really next after the Auditor General comes out and says this, this county government cannot account for a certain number of, billions of shillings?
Well, first of all, it's a critical concern in this country, not just at the county level, also the national level. What should happen is, after the Auditor General tables his report, the thing is that the report the Auditor General does not come up with conclusive findings of misuse of funds. What he does, he says that this expenditure has not been accounted for. There are queries on this. Or where he's satisfied that the law has been followed and money used in an accountable manner, then he accepts it. Or where he doesn't see that all the questions have been answered, he gives a disclaimer on that, on those funds. What should follow is that the respective county assembly committees, especially those looking at sectoral issues or even the finance committees, whichever way the county assemblies have formed themselves, they should pick up the report of the Auditor General and follow up, you know. And if they find that there is an issue here, then relevant bodies such as the EACC should take up that, the DPP, prosecution, recovery of the assets and all that. There is the whole full-fledged process that should take place on every expenditure that the Auditor General has raised an issue. The problem is that there is no systematic follow-up of what the Auditor General has raised every other year, and therefore things pile up. And of course, there's the usual challenges that we have always experienced with the prosecution of corruption cases in this country.
That's always been a problem.
And then the cycle goes on every year.
And it goes on.
Yes.
How can we, what indicators can we use, in the next 4 years, even in the middle of this particular term that is starting? What indicators can we use to indeed acknowledge that, certain governors or certain county governments are doing what they're supposed to be doing while others are not? What indicators can you give?
The first point is every 5 years, the county comes up with a county integrated development plan, and that should guide the major activities, the major plans, the major strategies that a county government is going to undertake. Ideally, all the counties should assess the plans they had at the first place and how they have achieved that over the 4 years, what has not been achieved, and what can be pushed forward. Secondly, after the 5-year CIDP, then they should have an annual plan. The annual plan breaks down the 5-year plan into the annual plan of activities, and then the annual plan is used to prepare the county budget for the year. And in preparing the budget, you address yourself to the priorities. It's all plans and the budgets are made through a participatory process. More importantly, before a county withdraws funds from the county revenue fund, they have to obtain authorization for the control of budget. And they are supposed, I think, in every quarter to deposit a cash flow statement showing the activities that are planned, and the control of budget is supposed to authorize on the basis of the cash flow statement and the budget which was agreed. If all those plans, because the law is very clear, the policies are very clear, but in practice you find that the implementation does not always go according to plan. So I think every county should aspire to that threshold which has been placed in the law and all that. Beyond what is in the law, because generally the law and policies have not dealt much with the level below counties, the wards. This, we talk about Turkana, we talk about Isiolo, and other Mandera, Garissa as marginalized areas. But if you go to those areas, you'll still find there are wards which are the poorest of the poor in those areas. So it's also in the Constitution and in the laws, we never really firmly dealt with that aspect. So it's up to the counties themselves to come up with laws, policies, practices, and expenditure decisions which promote equity at the county level. For instance, the Elgeyo-Marakwet County, after it has received its national share, they have a process of dividing the funds and using them within the county in accordance to a county poverty index. So which means they set a certain share aside as an equal share to be spent. Then they have another substantial share to be shared according to the poverty index that we have. The statistics are not very good, but it's a good indicator, and the national government, the relevant agencies like the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics should support such initiatives because that is the only way that you can reach the truly marginalized communities in this country.
All right, we'll be coming back to continue the conversation. I'd like to hear, what the solution would be, to create wholesome relationship between the national government and the county governments, because we saw quite a number of conflicts in the last 4 years. So we'll be coming back to talk about that. But for now, though, I want us to cross over to Kirinyaga. My colleague Carol Nderi is following up on the spurring in of Anne Waiguru. Remember that Anne Waiguru won that particular position of the governor position at 153,353 votes. That's what she was able to garner against 116,626 that was given to Martha Karua. So let's